Welcome everyone to ASQ1106 March 2022 section meeting. This is Arvid Harding. I'll be introducing our speaker, Jeff Rosaine, very briefly, and just I got a preview of some of the stuff that Jeff will be talking about, and we will be getting a chance to look at how, when you're auditing, some of the different perspective on auditing and some of the things to think about as you especially internal audits, and you run across issues and how you should approach those issues. So I look forward to hearing Jeff, and I know that you as well. So I will turn it right over to Jeff to introduce himself a little more and to get started into the program.
Thanks, Arvid. Yeah, like I said, my name's Jeff Rosaine. I know it says I'm president of J. Rosaine Quality Consulting, but and that's the company that I own. But I got hired about 5 years ago by my pretty much one and only client at the time, and that's where I'm still working as a quality manager. A company called CES Energy Solutions. We're oil and gas service company. Part of the company I'm most involved with is we have some chemical manufacturing plants for mud and fracking chemicals, downhole chemicals, that sort of thing. So even though I'm in oil and gas, most of the auditing that I'm doing comes from a manufacturing side. So I just kind of want to clarify that, because a couple of my examples, they kind of fit into that category. Also, I like doing presentations because I get a little bit better at them each time I do them. But the reason I get better is because I'm not super versed in them at first. So I don't mind taking as many questions as you guys have along the way, because it gives me a little bit of a break from speaking for a minute or two. So I haven't done a lot of these presentations online before. So I'm not sure if the easiest thing's just to unmute yourself, or I know you can raise your hands, but I don't know if I see that. But I'll try to take breaks every once in a while and ask if there's questions. And if I don't take a break, somehow get my attention, because I'll pretty much welcome a question at any point during this presentation.
Jeff, I'll be watching the chat as well. Okay. And you can unmute yourself if you want to speak. So. Okay.
So to get started here, basically I want to talk about it. I've been involved in quality since basically the mid-90s. I did my first internal audit, I believe it was in 1996, and that was when I worked for an industrial distribution company. I've done about, I want to say, between 500 and 600 audits since then. I used to do 40 or 50 a year. My new job, I only have to do about 10 a year, but nonetheless, it's added up over the years, that I'm probably well over 500. So, so I know a little bit about audits, but there's still stuff to learn every time I do an audit. But you know, of all those 500 audits, I kind of want to take you guys first, talk about the very first audit I did. You know, got into auditing. I thought this was just going to be this great thing. You know, it's in an ideal world. You know, I was told that it's internal audits. We work with management. You know, we're one big happy family. We're going to go into an operation with a different department or a different facility within our own organization, and take a look at what they do and learn from them, and you know, give them some advice. And you know, I thought this would be very harmonious. In the real world, it doesn't always happen like that, especially if the audit isn't that good. You know, if you've got some kind of harsh news to tell them, or you know, the results maybe aren't what they were expecting. Is that no one likes it when you call their baby ugly. So if you go in and you tell somebody that, hey, you're not doing this the right way, they might not take kindly to it. So like I said, I want to go back to the very first audit I did. It was June 1997. I was the lead auditor. I had one more guy with me, and it was his first audit as well. And they sent us up to a business in northern Alberta, part of our company. But you know, we just gotten out of our auditor training, and we were told that, you know, go in, take a look, watch the procedures. And, you know, we're thinking, you know, every little thing we find that's wrong, we're going to have to write this up as a non-conformance. And, you know, we thought that that's what our job was. So we did that, and we wrote up an awful lot of paperwork over 2 days. And, you know, at the end of the meeting, we sat down with the branch manager. Now, the guy that ran that branch, his name was Jim. He'd been in the industry, like I said, at the time, probably close to 40 years. I think he'd been in that same location for most of those 40 years. You know, he kind of ran his operation the way he wanted to. He had a successful operation. You know, he had a good staff. So when we sat down, and this is one of his first audits he was going through as we become ISO certified. And me and this other young gentleman, we told him what was wrong with his operation and what was wrong with his branch. So as you can imagine, that didn't really go over all that well. In fact, Jim knew my dad from earlier in his business career, and after that audit, he phoned my dad. So that was my welcome to auditing. Somebody phoned my dad, told them that I was not doing a very good job. So, so it was kind of discouraging at first, but I didn't quit auditing. You know, the auditing, the audits evolved. I got more audit experience. So I was working with other people on our internal audit team that also got more experience. And, you know, we improved our processes. You know, we toned down the rhetoric a little bit. You know, we weren't trying to be confrontational. We're, you know, kind of remembering, hey, we're going to work with management. You know, there's local management with these different places we're going to. You know, we're not necessarily, we want them to make corrections, but we don't want to point fingers. We want to keep them engaged. We want to make them feel like they're part of the audit process. And they improved. But, you know, we still get the impression, and I'm sure anybody on this call that does audits, you might be in the same situation where, you know, the management team, the guys who are going to audit, they maybe aren't as welcoming as you'd think, and maybe it's not their favorite day of the year, the day you guys come through. You know, as I say, it's a necessary inconvenience. You know, and that kind of hit home to me over the years. You know, I've had different managers express this in different ways, but, you know, basically what they usually tell me is, I can't fix every little thing. You know, I just don't have the time or resources. If you give me a list of 100 things, I'm not going to get to them. But if you give me a list of 3 or 4 things that are really important, that's what I'm going to work on first. And, you know, to me, that is more of a win. I would rather the guys fix the important stuff. So that's kind of the way I've sort of been approaching audits. You know, I'm still going to point out everything, but it's really, you know, I'll let these guys know that there's certain things that this is really where we're going to get our bang for the buck. So, you know, this is where you should concentrate your efforts. So again, I'm already getting dry. I see a couple people have hit chat. So I'm wondering if there's any questions on any of this so far, or if anybody's got any similar stories they can share quickly with, you know, audits that maybe didn't go all that well on the other end right off the bat.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to make a comment.
Sounds like he's saying Pareto principle is still relevant.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely true, especially from the management's end of things. So they'll, you know, and by rights, everybody's busy with a million things these days. Okay, so anyways, kind of continuing on with that theme, if there's no further questions or comments, you know, we kind of got, as an auditor, I've kind of got the attitudes like, don't sweat the small stuff. You know, if you bog down the operation by requiring a whole bunch of resources and people working on things. You know, the next year you go back there to audit them again, they're going to already be in a bad mood thinking, oh boy, here comes this guy to give us a whole bunch more work. You're going to get your pushback and you're going to get your resentment. And, you know, that's not what we want to do with internal audits. You know, the bottom line is we want to make the operation better. You know, sure, we want to stay, you know, if you know, most of my audits are, so we stay within ISO compliance. So yeah, there, you know, there are certain things that you have to fix, but you know, the bottom line is I want to go to an operation and I want to leave there 2 or 3 days later thinking that I've helped those guys improve in one way or another, in some small part, and in some cases some big part. So yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So what are some of the things you can do to, you know, kind of take out some of that resentment and as I keep saying, get management more engaged, more involved, and get them thinking the same way you are, that, hey, you know, this audit's not such a bad thing. In fact, you know, if we can get a few things come out of this audit that makes us better, you know, then it was well worth having Jeff, you know, come into town for a couple of days and you know, go through our operation and talk to all these people. So, you know, one of the things that, you know, while I'm auditing, I've got my checklist and I'm recording anything and everything that I can. But before I actually start writing up a final report or going into a closing meeting to discuss the results, I'm going to look at everything. And, you know, some of the things I've made my notes on, they might not make the cut to make it into the final meeting. You know, if you're looking, you say, you know, if you can't determine that the issue that you're identifying, it's got a tangible and significant cost, you know, it might not be worth issuing a formal non-conformance report. I'm assuming that most people do audits, they'll, if there's an issue, a common thing is to write it up on a non-conformance report, or NCR for short. You know, and that's the way we do things where I'm at. You know, creates a paper trail, but, you know, it gives, again, it creates work. Every time you fill out a form, it creates work. So, you know, sometimes I'm of the opinion that, you know, rather than write out a paperwork, if it's a small issue, you know, somebody forgot to sign a form or something, sometimes it's easier to spend 30 seconds correcting it than it is to spend 10 minutes creating a whole bunch of paperwork for a 30-second correction. You'll make a few more friends that way. But one thing that I've tried over the years, and it's not always that easy to do, but it's kind of what I want to talk about for the next few slides, and kind of one of the themes of this presentation is, you know, if you can assign a dollar value, then the managers, whether it's local managers or their bosses up the chain of command, right up to upper management, if you can start showing people that, hey, you know, there's a cost to this stuff. There's, you know, when we come and we find you guys are doing something wrong, and we're not just highlighting it so we can hear ourselves speak or get our name on a report. We want to highlight these things because if you fix them, you will, you know, save some money, or you'll create more opportunities, that sort of thing. So that's what I've found over the years, probably the most successful ways to get management really engaged with these audits. So I'm going to give you, I've got a few examples here. Again, anybody who wants to jump in at any time, just probably easiest just to unmute and fire a question at me. But this first one, we wrote a non-conformance. And again, this was at one of our manufacturing plants. They were falling behind on preventive maintenance. In fact, basically they've got six tanks where they blend product, and they'd kind of fallen, this whole building with these 6 tanks, they'd fallen behind schedule. So, you know, I asked the, you I had the basis for the non-conformance that preventive maintenance is behind, but before I went and put it into the report or finalize the non-conformance, I said to the plant manager or the preventive maintenance manager, whoever is available, I started asking some questions, and I said, there's no preventive maintenance. What do you guys think that there's a chance that the vessel will go down if we don't have preventive maintenance? Do I've got a question? So they said, well, there's probably a 20% chance that one of these vessels is going to go down if we continue without maintenance. So we talked about, okay, well, what are some of the costs if that goes down? Basically in a 24-hour period, that vessel would be able to create about $60,000 in revenue, minus $40,000 in cost of goods sold, but it would have been about a $20,000 loss overall of profit in 24 hours. Vessel failures typically take 48 hours to repair. The plant's not super isolated, but it's kind of out in the middle of the country. It's a couple hours away from any major cities. So by the time they get repair people and parts out there, it can be about a 48 hours repair. So, and a repair of about $1,500. So like I said, there's a lot of math here. I wasn't going to turn this into a math lesson, but roughly we did the math. Preventive maintenance, had we done it, would be $240. So, so we took a 20% times 20,000 times 2 days plus 1,500 was going to be about $9,500, and for $240 we could have prevented that. So to me, the cost of this non-conformance was $9,260. So I said, by getting somebody pointing out to the manager that the preventive maintenance program is behind schedule, you might want to get it back on schedule, because if you don't, you're going to have these breakdowns, and like we just proved, that's going to cost you, somewhere between $9,000 and $10,000. One of the keys is when I do these audits, I'm not an accountant, and every situation is different. So I'm not going to worry too much about, whether we've got the right costs down right to the hour or right to the dollar. In fact, I'll round down a little bit. I'll ask the manager, what do you think the cost of this is? I'll almost always defer to the manager, just to keep him engaged. If he thinks he's kind of leading this discussion on about what the costs are going to be, he'll be more interested in the conversation. And the bottom line is, he'll have a whole lot better idea of what the costs of his plant are. He's there 365 days a year, whereas I'm there 2 days a year. So, so I'll defer to him, but I'd like to get him thinking and talking, talking about dollars, thinking about dollars, and that's going to get him more engaged in the audit. I'm going to go on to another example here, and this is kind of an opposite one. This one was actually, I was in an engineering firm for a short time, about 5 or 6 years ago, just before I started with CES, and we were auditing a whole bunch of different projects, some really big projects, some not very big projects at all, some basically, $10,000 or $20,000 projects, right up to, projects, well in excess of $1 million or multi-million-dollar projects. But we wanted to treat all projects the same. So, we were auditing some of the small projects too, just to keep everybody honest. Well, we issued a non-conformance because on this particular project that we were auditing, they had not done a project quality plan. which according to the procedures that we had laid out for all of our projects is that you have to write the document, it's a report, it's called a project quality plan. So I talked to the manager, the project manager kind of raised issue with that. And he said, he goes, you're right, we don't have a project quality plan, but he goes, this is such a small project. He goes, the bottom line is, it's not really required for these small projects. I could get somebody to write it, but there's not really anybody that's going to take the time to read this plan after it's done, because we already know what we're doing on these small projects. All we're doing is wasting somebody's time, wasting the money it's going to cost to write these reports. It's not going to do morale any good, because somebody's writing a report that they know nobody's going to read. So he says, if it says we have to write one, we will.
The show will feature live original music from each of the 50 states, 5 U.S. territories, and one from the nation's capital. And
Trying to figure out who's, I need to mute,
Yeah.
working on it.
Okay.
Sylvia Kensinger.
this church resource, I grew up in church there. My parents, their parents.
Okay, I'll continue here. And as auditors, we had to agree with them. We said, you're right, there's not a lot of value here. So rather than take this NCR and applying it to the project, we went back to the department head and we said, listen, you've got a requirement in your procedures that says that project quality plans must always be written. We don't believe that they're necessary for some of these smaller projects. We basically said, after some back and forth, we determined that, any project under $100,000 probably doesn't need one of these project quality plans. They can write them if necessary, but most of the time they won't be necessary. So let's not make it a mandatory requirement. So again, there was about 40 projects in this department that were under $100,000. So if basically we eliminated the need for 40 of these reports at $250 each. So that audit saved the department $10,000. Now, again, I know some of these, depending on the company you work for, $10,000 might be a lot. And I know in some companies, $10,000 doesn't necessarily move the needle on the register that much. But as auditors, I still think that, if I could save the company $10,000, just myself on one day's work, I still think that's pretty good return on the price of the audit. It'll pay for the audit department pretty quickly if every audit you're saving a few $1,000s here and there, 10,000, that sort of thing. So, and again, I'm not so much worried about the dollar figure. What I'm worried about, again, is getting these managers thinking that, hey, there's a lot of places we can save money, and these auditors are on our side helping us try to find out how to do that. Okay, I'll take
if I may.
Sure.
Hi, it's Brenda Maris. I just wanted to make a couple comments. I appreciate this presentation because it's a very relatable experience. Companies now, anyone that has any decent sized company is going to have probably an internal audit program, especially if they are looking to get certified or have been certified to a quality system. What you described is right spot on. These are the experiences that probably a number of us have had in the past and continue to have them. But what you said makes a lot of sense. It's value added auditing. That's the key term now, is making sure that the internal audits add value. Management will listen more, like for examples that you've given where you're not nitpicking, but you're finding meaningful non-conformances that definitely can turn into not only an opportunity, but a real life cost savings. So I like this because everybody agrees, yes, audits, we need them, in theory, you can't get any more wonderful than an audit. But in reality, management has very little time and patience for things that they don't feel are important. And nitpicking, like you say, for sure, it's not the way to get them to have buy-in and commit. So I like your approach because that's kind of how I do it. And that's not only because it's just a practical approach. And I think it's very meaningful. So I appreciate you sharing that. So it sort of verifies, what I've done, what I'm doing, and that it seems to be the smarter way to conduct audits as opposed to maybe years ago where there were more, check the box, and it became, so monotonous that people would say, oh, here comes the auditor. But it actually now, in some cases, departments welcome you because they want you to highlight things, valuable things that they can work on and improve and make a meaningful difference to the bottom line. So just wanted to say that because I don't know if you hear that very often. I know I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Brenda. Yeah, no, that's true. I don't think too many auditors get thanked all that often. It's a bit of a thankless job, although I'm sure there's a lot of people in most companies that have thankless jobs. But
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, but no, I think a lot of us auditors go through the exact same things. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Okay, any other comments, or I'll move on to my third example here. Okay, this one I'll go into a little more detail, not so much about the cost of things, but this kind of show you kind of the back and forth I've had with one of the plant managers that I deal with. And again, when I say back and forth, he's a real good guy. We get along great, which helps a lot that we can have these conversations. But I was auditing them, and I had noticed that whenever we make products, they do a full QC, quality control check on anything going out the door, but they're only testing a sample of the materials that were coming into the plant, only about 25%. So they didn't have it written down. So I basically told them, I go, here's an opportunity for improvement. It's not a non-conformance because you've decided that you're only going to check 25%. But I go, I think you could probably do better if you test close to 100%. So, I brought this up, and, I asked him, this is basically how I remember this conversation going. I said to him, what's the chance that a bad or a tainted raw material could ruin an entire batch of product if it didn't get caught at QC? So, he thought about it. Well, he goes, it happens. He says we have about one bad batch every 10 months due to raw materials. So I said, okay, well, what would a typical batch cost? And he says, well, it's about $20,000 in the materials and production. So I said, okay, well, so $20,000 every 10 months. So that's $2,000 a month. So, $24,000 a year. So I said, this is real simple. You can save yourselves $24,000 by starting to test more product or test more materials coming in. So I kind of was pretty happy. I said, oh boy, that was a real easy win. He kind of smiled, but he didn't nod in agreement. So, basically what he said next to me was, yeah, that sounds good, the $24,000 savings, but to get that, and again, we took out a pen and pencil and he started working. He goes, the initial labor costs are going to be about $2,000 plus 50 hours of opportunity cost. He says, we're going to need some more lab equipment. We're going to need a couple more computers if we're going to test this much product. So let's roughly say $5,000. And he goes, the additional staff at $18 an hour, it's going to work out to $18,720 on the extra hours it's going to on the man hours it's going to cost to do this testing. So he said, well, you do this up, he goes, yeah, we'll save that $24,000, but it's going to cost us $25,720 to save that $24,000. So, so he kind of had me there. Like I said, we sat down, crunched the numbers. He decided that he didn't think it was good value to hire a whole bunch of extra QC people and invest it. And, for the most part, I was fine with that. I said, well, it was just a suggestion. I'm glad that we punched out the numbers. We talked about it. We had a pretty good conversation about it. And, I can't fault him. He's doing what's best for his bottom line. But what I did like was, after the fact, I got back to Calgary and, I sent out the audit report, and he emailed me back, and this I did cut word for word. Wasn't trying to remember the conversation because it was an email, so I could cut it out word for word. But he said, I think this is an excellent exercise. Shows there can be a significant cost to the mistakes. My rebuttal represents the other end of the spectrum. What is the cost in labor documentation, raw materials, equipment to track and improve the situation? So, when he emailed me that back, I was actually pretty happy that even though he didn't take my advice, he made good points. The key was that the plant manager now acknowledged that there is a real cost and benefits associated with the quality management system and the audits. And, it's not just busy work to keep our ISO certification. So, I thought this was a big step towards more management buy-in. And as far as I was concerned, that was mission accomplished. That's what I wanted was, trading some ideas and having discussions rather than an audit being a one-way thing where the auditor comes in and says, hey, here's A, B, C, and D, you got to fix these all. And, if they're not fixed when I come back, there's going to be a whole bunch more work. So, I thought this one worked out pretty good. So I'm getting close to the end here. So just a couple of other tips. If you're going to find some examples where, you can apply some dollars, you can put some costs to this stuff. I certainly encourage you to and make it as visible. I'll always say, err on the conservative side with these dollar figures. You don't want to put out some outlandish numbers that people are going to roll their eyes at or take exception to. Like I always say, a good method is just defer to what the plant manager or the department manager thinks the costs are going to be, because if they should know better than anybody how much it costs to run their operations and their processes. But if you can put into the audit report, that's a great thing. You can say, hey, we estimate that this audit, if all the recommendations and non-conformances are competently addressed, that it could X amount of dollars could be saved over the course of the next year. If you can do that, I encourage it. Some businesses have what they call a document value added system or a DVA system where, a lot of times they do that for customers, showing customers that, hey, we've saved you money. Rather than external customers, if you look at the people you're auditing as internal customers, same thing, put that on a documented value added. Say this audit, saved you X amount of dollars or provided you these many opportunities to save dollars. Put it in the management review. Management review, you're supposed to talk about audit results. So again, one of those audit results can be that dollar number. Say this is a successful audit. We identified, $10,000 worth of improvements that can be made. If you track all of your continuous improvements, again, put that dollar right next to it. If you're, again, I'm using a lot of these things are key to ISO, which maybe not everybody's as worried about, but the risk and mitigation, again, fits right in with the ISO 2015 standard. Use that dollar figure. show here's the risk in dollars, here's the mitigation costs in dollars. But basically wherever you can put that number out there, you can put those numbers out there, get people's attention. You're going to add more legitimacy to your internal audits. You're going to get more engagement. You're going to be taken more seriously when you go in when you're going around. Again, assuming you get agreement. Don't just put numbers out for the sake of putting numbers out. Make sure that there's some agreement. And one more slide I kind of added on to this presentation. And this is actually just a little bit out of the scope of internal audits, but again, I worked with one of my plants, and we said, what are the cost of some of our non-conformance, some of the common problems and issues that we have month to month. Again, I might not have been able to do this if I didn't have a really good correspondence with some of these plant managers and that, but I went basically my favorite plant that I get along really good with the guys, that they're really engaged. And I said, let's sit down and figure out some of these costs every month for these different non-conformances. So, and this would vary by business to business. I don't want to go through this whole chart, but, just certain things, if the vendor's late on delivery, depending on, and that's, if your business is like ours, like most are these days, the supply chains, this can have a huge, huge effect. But, just even simple deliveries by a couple hours can cost us a few $100s. When we get bad chemical come in from a vendor, even if we catch it at QC before we use it, we still have to check back with the original vendor. Can we return it? Hey, this doesn't look right. Is there a, specific gravity or something is off? What went wrong with this? Can we use it? All these different costs that go into fixing these problems. So again, we've kind of got a dollar range. We're not right to the very cent, but at the end of every month, we can go through and say, hey, these are what these problems are costing us on a month-to-month basis. And, let's look at some ways we can start to eliminate some of these costs. So again, it's, quality managers, we don't always think in dollars and cents, but, and it's not easy to do, and it's really difficult to be really accurate, but I still think it's, just putting some numbers on these things that sure gets people's attention. So I think that's pretty much all I really had for my presentation. I know that's the last slide, but again, I'm happy to take any more questions, or if anybody's got anything to add, please do. We can learn a lot from each other. If anybody's got some similar experiences or something, I'd sure like to spend the next couple minutes at least talking about them.
Hey, Jeff, one thing I noticed on your last chart, which I really like, is the customer at the bottom.
Okay, let's see if I can back up and.
Yeah, but one area that I don't see on your chart that sometimes causes problems too is getting back to the ISO standard is design and development. That sometimes, a change notice, we averaged, or we costed out on a conservative of at least $1,500 to $3,000, just writing it, testing it, handling it, filing it, validating it, getting it back into production. So that, to me, that might be one somewhere in that internal, you do have product quality, but I do think that design and development errors and how that comes back, from there. Because the other thing you find interesting is like you're showing here, back to the old cost of quality, internal versus external, that some of these, like you have returns down here. And one of the other ones that we also monitored was customer or satisfaction, that even though it's not a costly sort of thing, it can be an irritant to the customer of not being able to meet their goals or their production lines or whatever, because we have to send them another batch, and that takes FedEx at least an hour or two to get it to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree. And you know, in different occasions, you know, again, it's so hard to put numbers on some of these, you know, it depends on the customer, but I've always said, you know, for instance, if we give the customer a bad product, you know, he returns it, it's a $200 cost to us, let's say. But I said, how many times do we have to give that customer a bad product before he says, you know something, my next order, I think I might just give it to the guys down the street. All of a sudden, you know, that could cost us, you know, $1 million contracts. You know, so how do you factor that in? And you know, you always got to remember there's a cost of losing customer satisfaction. And, you know, obviously it varies from customer to customer, but boy, that can really, really drive up the cost too. So I fully agree. And I agree on the design and development. That's such a complicated part of our business. And again, I'm sure with so many businesses, they're a group I have trouble, some of our engineers and chemists, I have trouble engaging with them to get numbers, because their numbers, they're speaking, sometimes they're speaking in a language a little more complicated than this little internal auditor can really totally grasp. But you know, it's certainly a valid point. There's a lot of costs with redesigning and change, management of change, that sort of thing. So that's something I'd like to kind of get numbers on too eventually. So I appreciate you spotting that.
We have a question from Brian Loria. He says, good presentation, found it very helpful how you've related your audit findings with the cost of quality and the return on investment for the audit process itself. He asked, do you execute follow-up audits and show improvement differentials in cost?
No, I can't say we do a real good job of that. You know, it seems like every time we go to an audit, we don't do as much review as we should. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. Then no, that's probably an area that I certainly could improve on. You know, we want to make sure everything's fixed, but when we start going on to the next audit, I'm kind of more looking ahead at the cost coming up than making that comparison. I kind of, at least I think that's what the question is. So it's probably something that's not that hard to do. I'm just admitting I'm not doing a good job of that yet.
This is Brian. Sorry, I'll jump in. Just trying to be succinct with using the chat. So I guess really maybe a better way to ask that is if you cross a threshold, you know, like the company's decided that there's a threshold, would that then be something you would say, okay, we'll revisit this in 3 months and see if we can show a positive differential?
Yeah, I mean, we would. I can't think of any real specific examples of us doing that other than, but yeah, I mean, we do want to keep seeing improvement, and you know, maybe there's an opportunity there, you know, with that dollar figure, just, you know, just to kind of reemphasize why the audit follow-up is important. And just say, hey, you know, we can fix this month, or we can fix it, you know, right before the next audit, which is usually once a year. If we fix it 1 month after the audit instead of 11 months after the audit, well, that's an extra 10 months of savings we've got. So yeah, I think that's probably that, you know, I think that's a really good idea. As an auditor, I'm not as good at follow-up sometimes as I probably should be. And I think the plant manager the same. It's like, well, he's gone for another year. We got through it. So, but no, that's a very valid point.
Great response. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jill O'Dell. I really enjoyed your presentation. One thing that, you know, I'm in the pharmaceutical industry, and I'm wondering how, you know, how do you calculate the cost of risk, you know, if something does have a defect and it gets out to a patient for patient safety? You know, that's one of our biggest concerns is product quality, patient safety, things like that. Does that factor into your calculations just the risk and how you could, I'm not sure how you would calculate that. I'm just curious to see if you
Yeah.
have any ideas for that.
Yeah. Again, I don't have a lot of really good examples to give you. In our industry, probably the biggest risk again is losing customer satisfaction. The worst thing that we can do is have bad product get to the customer. Bad product could damage their equipment as well, which leaves us liable that way. But the biggest thing is, we don't, our industry, it's a small amount of big customers. Now, at the same time, in pharmaceuticals, obviously, and I don't know a lot about pharmaceuticals, no more than the next guy, but obviously something goes wrong with pharmaceutical, it's, obviously there's going to be some extremely serious ramifications with risks. So, again, I guess I would, you kind of look at that customer satisfaction thing or, to me, that's the worst thing. If something gets to a customer, because not only do you lose business, but you're liable. So, by all means, if you can put numbers on that, you definitely should. Like I said, just off the top of my head, I can't give you any real good examples, but yeah, like I said, and especially in your industry, it's probably that much more important.
Hey, Jill, this is Jay Arthur.
Huh?
I work a lot with healthcare, and it may not be so much the quality of the product, but if it's administered incorrectly, there's so many, I think there's $100 million in medication errors.
Right.
It's the delivery, the quantity, and it might be something as simple as figuring out how do we mistake proof the delivery of whatever it is we use, so that it's not possible to give too much to an infant, or too little to a 250-pound guy, or it may not be the physical product, but it might be how it's administered. So I'd be very curious about that, because that's what I see a lot in healthcare.
Yeah,
Well,
you have a good point
that
there
would-
too.
That would be part also of your FMEA program. You capture all the risk associated with what can go wrong at what stage, from the point raw materials come in all the way until it's delivered to the patient. I've worked in pharma medical device for about half of my career, and that's how we do it. And then we assign risks to each issue, and then from there, of course, we prioritize. And if it meets a threshold, then that's a no-brainer. Action needs to be taken. If it's residual risk, which everybody has, then we recognize that can be managed. But it's usually within the FMEA process that any type of risk associated with a product, a chemical or product or a device that could harm a patient would be looked at for all possible avenues of failure modes.
And
But
as
if anybody else has done it differently, please share with us.
This is Brian. I'll just jump in for a second. The longer I've kind of danced around in various industries, the more I see a lot of overlap between some of these QA tools, such as the FMEA, project management types things, such as risk management, analysis,
Right.
qualitative analysis. And it's so hard to kind of drive a risk program because it is kind of qualitative to some degree. So, I'll just say that it's the typical thing. You got to get the stakeholders together that matter, that this is going to affect. Sometimes do some sort of a probability impact matrix and then drive towards an FMEA. I've just seen where people sometimes try to immediately pick up the FMEA and just go down the rabbit hole. So maybe that's something I just offer that as a thought. Start at qualitative and then drive to quantitative.
And on that same note, as one who supplied aerospace, medical, and a bunch of other industries, I actually discovered that the same component that we manufactured had 5 different inspection plans based upon who our customer was.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite interesting to see that, you know, who had the stiffest one, and believe it or not, it wasn't aerospace or medical. But nonetheless, back to your point, Jeff, about the risk and how you do these inspections or whatever. When you look at that response back from the plant manager, it's like we have to consider the intended use, which is told to us by our customer. Now, not all of them do that, but what I found out was, like I said, I asked and I said, you mean to tell me this same little component, depending upon who the customer is, has a totally different inspection set criteria, aspects, attributes that we look at? And they said, absolutely. So that was another factor that we had, now that all this risk-based approach was coming at us from our customers, and it made it quite interesting, to say the least.
I can imagine.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I love that. I love when more people get involved and start sharing ideas. That's what I like when I do a presentation. So I appreciate everybody's comments.
But we appreciate your presentation.
Yeah, I'm glad of that. Thanks, guys. I enjoy doing these things, so that's great.
Jeff, there's great comments coming in on the chat session. You get a chance to glance at that.
Yeah,
Thank you
I did.
very much, and for making your presentation, your time. If there's any more, I'll give one more chance. If anybody has any other comments, I'll stop just a second. Not hearing any. Sandeep, do you have anything to say?
Oh, thanks, Jeff, for this presentation. I mean, it does apply to a lot of us. Like, we all have been, at least at some point, in the quality field, and depending on what kind of product that we're looking for. Like, of course, the end result is always customer satisfaction and what the customers need. I myself from the pharma, so I resonate with what Jill said. Is like, how do we make sure that the patient's safety is at foremost? So, I mean, yeah.
Good. No, that's good. Thanks. Okay, well, I guess if there's no more questions, I'll just wrap up by saying thank you for this opportunity to present. I know Duke asked me kind of out of the blue. I said, oh, sure. So I'm glad I said yes, because it was fun. I learned a lot, and helps me. So thanks again, guys, and good luck with your quality endeavors going forward.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff.
I'm stopping recording.
Okay.